It weighed about 6 1/3 pounds. It was designed in 1937 to shoot birds, and in the swamps of the Mekong Delta, it became the weapon Viet Cong fighters learned to fear inside 10 yards. The gun was the Ithaca Model 37, a 12-gauge pump shotgun, a sporting arm built for hunters standing in open fields waiting on ducks to come off the water. Nothing about it was designed for war, yet a Navy SEAL point man named James Watson carried one slung on a cord around his neck through 2 tours of the worst close-quarters fighting of his life. He called it Sweetheart. He would not part with it, and bolted to the muzzle of that shotgun was the strangest part of the whole story. A flat piece of sheet metal, brazed on, shaped like the bill of a duck. It did something no ordinary shotgun did. Instead of throwing its buckshot in a circle, it fanned the pellets out sideways, a flat, horizontal line of lead at about chest height. On a jungle trail where a man crossing your front is the target you get, a wide, flat pattern was worth more than a tight, round one. They called it the duck bill. Here is the strange thing. The shotgun the American military issued most in Vietnam was not this one. The gun most soldiers actually carried was a different make entirely, and its story is stranger than the Ithaca's. And the reason a bird gun could beat a brand new rifle at close range came down to a single design choice hidden on the underside of the receiver. We will get to the bottom of that gun, literally, and we will get to the colonel who tried to take one of these shotguns away by telling a SEAL it was against the rules of war. If you want the whole story, the design on the bottom of the receiver, and the colonel who said this gun was illegal, subscribe and stay with me for the duck bill. To understand why a hunting shotgun ended up in the jungle at all, you have to start with a shortage. When the United States began pouring troops into Southeast Asia in the early 1960s, the armory shelves were nearly bare of combat shotguns. After the Second World War, only a handful of designs were still carried on the books as standard: the Winchester Model 12 trench gun and the Stevens Model 520-30 and Model 620A trench guns. That was it, and even those were drying up. Winchester ended production of the Model 12 in the early 1960s because it had become ruinously expensive to build. Stevens had dropped its older military models years before. So the military did what militaries do when they are short. It reached backward. Old Second World War trench guns were pulled from storage, stripped, refinished in gray Parkerizing, fitted with fresh parts where the old ones had worn, and shipped to Vietnam. Winchester Model 12s, Stevens Model 520-30s. Even a few Winchester Model 1897s, a design from the 1890s, turned up in the hands of American soldiers whose fathers and grandfathers had carried the same guns. This was not new. The American military had a long, quiet habit of reaching for the shotgun whenever the fighting got close and ugly. The first official government purchase of combat shotguns came around the turn of the 20th century in the Philippines, where short-barreled Winchester Model 1897 riot guns proved brutally effective against Moro fighters in dense terrain. In the trenches of France in the First World War, the same Model 1897, fitted with a bayonet, earned a reputation so fearsome that the German government filed a formal diplomatic protest against it. Hold on to that detail. It comes back. After that war, the trench guns lingered in the arsenals, seeing quiet use in hotspots in the Caribbean and in China between the wars, and the supply held until the eve of the Second World War, when the whole cycle of contracts and shortages began again. Vietnam was the same lesson all over. The jungle collapsed the distances. Firefights happened at the range of a thrown rock. And in that world, a load of buckshot did work that a rifle bullet could not. But the recycled guns were running out. New contracts had to go out. And here is where it gets telling. The weapons that answered the call were not purpose-built military designs at all. In 1962, the first new contract went to the Ithaca Gun Company for a plain riot gun version of its Model 37, a gun essentially identical to the ones Ithaca was selling to police departments and bird hunters, marked now with a U.S. stamp and a special serial range that started with the letter S. The following year, the government turned to the Stevens Arms Company for another sporting design and had it modified in a very specific way. A shortened buttstock, cut down to fit the smaller frames of America's South Vietnamese allies. These were commercial shotguns going to war. And the question of which one would earn a reputation and which one would just fill a crate came down to engineering. It came down to what happened on the bottom of the Ithaca's receiver, and to a set of experiments at a place called Frankfurt Arsenal. Turn the Ithaca Model 37 over in your hands and you find the thing that made it. On almost every pump shotgun of the era, spent shells kicked out of a port on the right side of the receiver. That port was a doorway. In a swamp, doorways let things in: mud, grit, sand, water, the fine paste of a rice paddy. The Model 37 had no side port. It loaded and it ejected from the same opening on the bottom. One aperture instead of two. Fewer ways for the jungle to get inside the gun. That was the whole secret. It sounds almost too simple, but simple was the point. James Watson said he could dip his Model 37 in a muddy creek, wash it out, and it would keep firing. Another man on his team carried a full automatic Remington 7.188, a far more impressive weapon on paper, capable of emptying a magazine in a heartbeat. In the wet filth of the Delta, it jammed constantly. It was finicky, fragile, temperamental. The Ithaca just worked. Reliability in that place was not a feature. It was the difference between a functioning weapon and a club. Now, understand what a shotgun actually does, because the movies lie about it. A shotgun does not spray a wall of lead that clears a room on its own. It still has to be pointed. What buckshot buys you is margin. Miss by an inch with a rifle and you have missed clean. Miss by an inch with a load of buckshot and 4 or 5 pellets, still find the target. And a shotgun is the easiest weapon in the world for hitting something that is moving, which matters because in a gunfight, everything moves. Which brings us back to the duckbill. In the middle of the 1960s, engineers at Frankfurt Arsenal went looking for a way to raise a shotgun's odds of a hit. Their idea was a spreader choke, a muzzle device that would open the pattern wider than a normal barrel could. What came out of that work was the duckbill. Instead of a round cloud of shot, it produced an ellipse, a flat, horizontal fan. The pellets spread out sideways along a line roughly at the height of a man's chest. A modern reproduction of the design throws a pattern as wide as 6 feet at 12 yards. It worked best, really. It worked only with number 4 buckshot, a smaller pellet that put more projectiles into that wide sweep. Think about what that does on a jungle trail. A tight circle of shot is a small answer to a moving target. A flat horizontal line is a wall across the path. A man stepping across your front at 10 or 15 yards is far more likely to walk into a line than into a dot. The duckbill turned the shotgun from a point weapon into a sweep. It was fitted mostly to Ithaca Model 37s and to a smaller number of Remington 870s. The men who carried the Model 37 regarded it as the finest combat shotgun of the war. And in May of 1966, the Navy put money behind that regard, ordering 3,000 special-purpose Model 37s at $37.60 apiece, serial numbered in a special range in the 900,000s, shipped to the Naval Amphibious Base at San Diego. That was the pipeline that fed the SEALs. But being the most respected shotgun is not the same as being the most common one. And to see how far the shotgun really traveled in Vietnam, and which gun actually filled the most hands, you have to look past the Ithaca. The shotgun that armed the most men in Vietnam was not the Ithaca. It was the Stevens Model 77E. More than 50,000 of them were built for the war. Some accounts put the number closer to 77,000, which made it, by volume, the standard American combat shotgun of the conflict, even though it is almost forgotten today. It was the Stevens with the shortened stock, cut down for the South Vietnamese. It was the first American combat shotgun fitted with a rubber recoil pad. It was a conventional design, with the ordinary side ejection port the Ithaca had done away with. And it was not as tough. The joint where the buttstock met the receiver was weak, and a fair number of them cracked and broke in service. It was issued to American soldiers, to Marines, and to South Vietnamese troops, and it gave acceptable service without ever earning the affection the Ithaca did. The Ithaca Model 37 came in smaller numbers, but with a longer shadow. Around 22,000 of the special S-prefix riot guns were made under the First Army contract, alongside the later Navy order, and a small run of Model 37 trench guns near the end. Then, in the late 1960s, the newer designs arrived. The Winchester Model 1200 came in with an aluminum alloy receiver built to be lighter and cheaper than the discontinued Model 12, offered in a trench gun version that still used the bayonet adapter pattern from the First World War, and it stayed in limited Army service long after Vietnam. The Remington 870 went to the Navy and the Marines, and the Marine Corps adopted a distinctive variant, the 870 Mark I, with a 21-inch barrel, an extended magazine holding 8 rounds, rifle sights, and an adapter that let it mount the same bayonet as the M16 rifle. That Mark I would stay the standard Marine combat shotgun for decades after Vietnam ended. The bayonet itself carried a strange thread of history. The blade meant for these shotguns was the M1917, the same pattern chosen for the first trench guns back in the First World War, and still the standard shotgun bayonet half a century later. By Vietnam, the old wartime stock was nearly gone, so fresh contracts went out to 2 firms, General Cutlery and Canada Arsenal, to make more. The new blades wore checkered plastic grips and were plainly not built to the standard of the old ones. A soldier in 1968 might have fixed a brand new bayonet, or one refurbished from the trenches of France, onto a shotgun descended from the same idea that had frightened the German army 50 years before. The ammunition told its own story of improvisation. Early in the war, troops were issued leftover Second World War shells, the M19, an all-brass 12-gauge load of double-aught buckshot, durable, waterproof, and after years in bad storage, so corroded that huge quantities had to be thrown away. The fix was modern plastic. Plastic-cased buckshot, cheaper and nearly immune to corrosion, was adopted as the XM162 in double-aught, and then a smaller load, the XM257 in No. 4 buckshot, was brought in for the kind of close work the jungle demanded, first in red plastic, later in a subdued green. Even carrying the shells was a problem the system never quite solved. The issued pouch, the M1938, was a design first adopted back in 1921 and held just 12 shells in web loops. 12! In a firefight that was nothing and the pouches were reportedly seldom used, most men simply crammed their buckshot into M16 magazine pouches instead, or stuffed loose handfuls into their pockets and reloaded by feel. Where did all this actually matter? 2 places above all: night ambushes and defending a shotgun in the dark. In those moments, when a target appeared at a few yards and vanished, the shotgun was in its element. It was reported that American units carrying shotguns tended to log higher enemy counts than units without them, and at the very tip of that spear was the duckbill. Only a handful were ever made, but they went to the men doing the closest, dirtiest work: Navy SEALs and Marine reconnaissance teams. The horizontal fan of shot was the literal edge the whole story turns on, the reason a man at 10 yards was in more danger than he understood. James Watson's sweetheart carried its duckbill through his second and third tours. But here is the turn. For all the fear that device inspired, the duckbill was fragile, temperamental, and rare. And when you look closely at what it really was, the legend and the record start to come apart. Start with the death ray story, because that is how the duckbill is usually remembered, as a device that turned a shotgun into something unstoppable. The people who actually handled them tell a smaller story. The choke had a habit of cracking. The sheet metal bill would fracture under the repeated blast, and a steel support ring had to be added around it just to hold it together. It patterned well with No. 4 buckshot and poorly with anything else, which locked you into one load. Spreading the shot wider also meant thinning it out, which cut the effective range down to close quarters and no further. And the custom guns were so hard to get that SEALs who wanted one often could not, and made do with standard shotguns instead. The most feared shotgun attachment of the war was, in truth, a short-lived experiment that kept breaking. Then there is the other myth, the one that goes to the word feared itself. There is a persistent belief, repeated for a century, that the combat shotgun is illegal under the laws of war. James Watson ran into it directly. As the story is told in his memoir, an officer confronted him and informed him that shotguns violated the Geneva Convention. Watson kept his gun anyway, and told the man that if they ever sent him to Geneva, he would leave it at home. But until then, he and that shotgun were not parting company. The belief has roots. It goes back to that German diplomatic protest in the First World War, when the trench gun's effect in close fighting was so severe that the German government tried to have it declared a war crime. But the record does not actually support the ban. Shotguns themselves were never outlawed. The law of war concerns itself with projectiles that expand or flatten in the body, the old prohibition on certain kinds of bullets, not with the shotgun as a weapon. The fear was real, and it was earned in physics. The legal ban was folklore, passed hand to hand until people believed it. So the weapon the Viet Cong feared at 10 yards earned that fear honestly, in buckshot and close range and the simple math of a moving target. But the mythology that grew up around it, the death ray duckbill, the outlawed shotgun, grew far larger than the modest, fragile sheet metal truth underneath. Go back to where we started. A gun designed in 1937 to shoot birds, light enough to carry all day, built with no thought of jungles or ambushes, only of a hunter in an open field. That is the object at the center of this whole story. Everything that made it fearsome in Vietnam was already there in the sporting gun, the lightweight, the reliability, that one clean opening on the bottom of the receiver. The war did not build the Ithaca Model 37. The war just found it and discovered it was already the right tool. Most of these guns never came home. When the United States pulled out of Southeast Asia, the shotguns largely stayed behind, left in the armories of an ally that was about to fall, which is why the S-prefix Ithacas and the Stevens 77Es are so seldom seen today. They were sporting guns that went to a war and simply did not return from it. But James Watson's sweetheart survived. You can go and see it. It sits today in a display case at the National Navy UDT SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida, a stubby, cut-down Ithaca Model 37 with the buttstock sawed off to a pistol grip, the extended magazine, and the duckbill on the muzzle, the later version with the steel ring wrapped around the bill to keep it from cracking. Years after the war, Watson visited the museum and found his own shotgun set up in a diorama of a captured enemy weapons cache. It bothered him. His gun had never been captured. He wanted it moved. That is the last image to hold. Not a wall of lead, not a death ray. A gray, battered sheet metal duckbill under museum glass, cracked once, ringed with steel, and kept bolted to a bird gun that a man carried on a cord against his chest through the worst nights of his life, and would not, under any circumstances, leave behind.